Welcome to Succession Stories, Insights for Next Generation Entrepreneurs. I'm Lori Barkman. I've spent my career bringing an entrepreneurial approach to mature companies struggling with change. As an outside executive of a third-generation, 120-year-old company, I was part of a long-term succession plan. Now I work with entrepreneurs, privately held companies, and family businesses to develop innovations that create enterprise value and transition plans to achieve their long-term goals. On this podcast, listen in while I talk with entrepreneurs who are driving innovation and culture change. I speak with owners who successfully transition their company and others who experience disappointment along the way. Guests also include experts in multi-generational businesses and entrepreneurship. If you are a next-generation entrepreneur looking for inspiration to grow and thrive, or an owner who can't figure out the best way to transition their closely held company, this podcast is for you. When you face your biggest ownership and leadership transition decisions, will you be ready? Most owners feel as if they are pushed out of their business, but the happiest exits occur when there are more factors pulling you towards your next. That's why I'm offering a way for you to evaluate your readiness on a personal level. Go to getmyprescore.com. Take our online survey. It just takes 8 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a custom report of your personal readiness to exit your business, including a summary of unseen factors that could lead to regret. In addition, you'll receive a free ebook, The Exit Checklist, a 5-step personal action plan for a happy and lucrative exit from your business. Your score means getting closer to your next chapter, whatever, wherever that may be. Visit getmyprescore.com. You might be surprised by the statistic that 50% of business owners are unhappy after the sale of their company. Dan Scheiferstein is a serial entrepreneur who scaled up and sold 3 companies. He would describe himself as being in the half that felt satisfied afterwards. Even though these were successful exits, Dan learned what would have been better. Now he works with business owners on developing an exit plan for selling their company, increasing their likelihood of success and happiness. Dan Scheiferstein, welcome to Succession Stories. You and I met recently through the Exit Planning Institute chapter in Pittsburgh, and I just have really enjoyed getting to know you. You're a super great guy, and I think we have a kindred spirit. I'm so glad to welcome you on the show today.
Thank you, Lori. Good to be here.
So let's start by talking about you and your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in northern Ohio, Amherst, Ohio. Yeah, so I spent the first, 28 years of my life in that area. Great 50s, 60s kind of childhood, just like TV. And all of my family and my wife's family's from there. So yeah, that was the world as I knew it, as northern Ohio.
So a lot of people I talk to on the show, I find that there's an entrepreneurial gene. I have a theory about that, where you are an entrepreneur. Were there entrepreneurs in your family?
Yes. My grandfather started a business in the 1920s in Lorain, Ohio, an insurance agency, Scheiferstein Insurance, a very original brand at that time. And he was someone obviously I knew. It was my grandfather, and as a young person, and my dad and his brother went into that business in the mid-50s, 60s. And that was my childhood, my life. It was being part of a family business, not working, obviously, but
they didn't put you behind the desk to seal envelopes or anything?
We visit on weekends and, hang around and stuff like that. But
you were used to seeing the name on the door. You were used to seeing that identity as an entrepreneur and having that, you're like, oh, I recognize your name, right? You're part of that insurance family, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I really have to say that a difference was my father never encouraged us. I had 2 other brothers. There was 5 children that he had, still has, and never encouraged us to go into his business. And
really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because there was 5 of us, and then he had a brother who had 3 others, and we were all within 6 years, so there wasn't just enough room to go around. And I really am glad about that, obviously, because I got all the revealing of the business life of being an owner, an entrepreneur, without being shoved into a piece of a puzzle, being insurance or Lorain, Ohio, or anything like that.
Yeah, you weren't like locked into something.
Exactly. I always felt that I would be an independent business person someday, somehow. I don't know. It's not like I went out searching for it. They didn't have those entrepreneurial classes then.
You. Right,
yeah,
right.
I had the image of running your own show because that's, here again, what my dad did. So yeah, I really thank him for that, not knowing how deliberate it was.
They set the stage for you to have the interest. So tell us your entrepreneurship story. How did you get into business? What were the most significant experiences that you'd like to share?
I guess my first business experience and first company was absolutely my favorite and most formative. And after I got out of business school, I went to Cincinnati, and I was sort of a sales engineer type guy and a marketing bent. But the reason is because that's as a biology major and a business guy, it's sort of like the only thing you can really sort of qualify for is this sort of talking to other engineers and being able to communicate with them. As I got starting my family, I decided that if I don't get out on my own, like right away, I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life, this was in the late 80s, and being in the industry was it was like Pittsburgh at that time. There was a lot of heavy industry that was not on the upswing, but on the downswing. So I found an opportunity in the Wall Street Journal Opportunity Days. And I don't think they even have that anymore, but this is here again in the late 80s. And it had a advertisement for a national business that I started here in Pittsburgh. And it was a franchise. And I was the third one in the country. And the reason it's attractive to me because it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. So it's like check that box on starting a business, try to do something that no one else is doing. So here I came to Pittsburgh, knew absolutely no one, didn't have much of a support group, but it was a great business experience because I was doing something that had very little competition.
And what was the name of the company?
That was Record Masters.
And what did it do?
We stored records for hospitals, actually. This was at a time where I knew nothing about record storage. I didn't know anything about information management within hospitals, but it was a simple service concept. You take all the physical paper x-rays, records from all the hospitals in Oakland and the surrounding Western Pennsylvania area. We concentrated them in a warehouse on the north side. And then we did 24/7 delivery of those original medical records back to the hospital on a demand basis. So that was my only clients, hospitals. That was it. So it was a very specific service to a very specific population.
Yeah, that was going to be my observation for the business. And you can tell us how successful it ended up being, but I think it was a good ending here for you on that. And because you and I have talked about it offline. But what's interesting about it is the niching down, right? You had a specific application. There was a very specific utility and benefit that your specific client niche, which were hospitals, derived. And there was a recurring revenue stream because there was always a need for record management, and they have limited space and very expensive space in the hospital. So yeah, I could see how that would take off in the right market area.
And this was an excellent market area. So that's how I started. It was my first business. I hired my first person. I got my first warehouse. I got my first client. It was all those firsts. And because we were so unique and new, we were inventing the service as we went along. I hate to sound so old, but I bought the first fax machine for Presby Hospital because they were my first client, and it was part of delivering my service. I guaranteed 1 hour delivery, 24 hours a day. And so a fax machine was just invented then. I think it cost me like $10,000. And
wow.
Yeah, and it was supposed to go in the ER. And actually the president of the hospital at that time, which was a long time ago, he actually put it in his office because he didn't have one. So, it was sort of that sharing. And I said, fine, I don't care as long as I have the, as long as it's used for medical records, I didn't care how much they sent. So it was that type of evolutionary thing with a very low tech service of delivering paper records, but utilizing, whatever technology that was being evolved right at that time to help, facilitate it. So
what ended up happening with that? Yeah, very exciting. What ended up happening with that company?
I was part of myself, we ended up being 14 locations across the country. I own 2 of them. And I did a roll-up with one of those locations and the other 3 largest ones in the country, and with an investment banker. And that allowed us to get enough resources and go from a lot of small little companies to, a $15 million company. And then we bought up the other locations. And then this was the 90s. Now I'm in the 90s. And lo and behold, we sold that group to Iron Mountain, which was trying to get into the healthcare niche. And we owned it, coast to coast. We had, all the hospitals in most of the major cities. So Iron Mountain was a company that was, at that time, a focused business record company.
Okay.
So that was how that evolved, from a bunch of little locations, mom and pop businesses, a roll up, and then a eventual flip to a public company at that time. They had just gone public. So yeah, it was a great 90s stories. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Awesome. That's really incredible. And it's a great example. As you said, the tech is different today, but the concepts are still valid, which is finding a market niche, doing it really well, obviously on the financial performance, making sure that you're scaling it, which sounds like you were, and looking for tech opportunities. It makes me chuckle because I think if the fax machine then is almost like the razor blade today, right? Yeah. Gillette and their model of, they basically gave away the razor blades to, sort of keep you coming. So I think that's really a great example. What did you do after you sold the company to Iron Mountain?
Well, I only stayed on after that transition because at that time I'd been with the business for 10 years, approximately. I only stayed in about 6 more months after that. And then I actually dropped out for a year and traveled with my family around the world and came back. You say dropped out. That doesn't sound like a dropout. That sounds like I became a homeschool teacher.
I'm going to go have some fun.
Yeah. But it was one of those, it's sort of that cycle of entrepreneurship where you risk a lot, you get rewarded, and now what? Okay, now what? I wasn't in the records business as a career move. I was opportunistic about it. I didn't train for it. I didn't know anything about it before I went into it. So it's like you wake up on a Monday morning and you're not the president of a company anymore, or the CEO or an owner of anything. And so it's a very reflective moment. And so it took me, and I was relatively young, I was in my early 40s at that time. And it took me almost 4 years before I found another business that I felt I could, have some success with and scale and engagement with. And that was when I started moving into the therapy services. And here again, it's sort of related to healthcare, but this is my first time actually working with patients and doctors. On the records side, it was all administration and management of hospitals, never the physician himself, never entered into our contact point. We were just, delivering records, which was a nice way to be. Now, it was sort of like going from the pan into the fire. So, but I started a physical therapy and pulmonary rehab here in Pittsburgh. Here again, I was approached by some associates. I was trying to be creative, and I called it the gentleman farmer type of transition. And at that time, what
does that mean, gentleman farmer?
Well, it's sort of like, do you really need to bring in the crops to live, or are you creating a farm for the lifestyle? Okay. So that's where I was sort of looking at that point. Little did I know that I started on a road or a path of establishing rehab services that had a adoption rate that was very difficult to scale up. And here again, I've had 10 years previously of a lot of success in the business. The first 3 I had forgotten about because those were the 0 years where I was I had zero sales and nobody knew what the heck I was doing. So I was starting that all over again. And sure enough, I find myself after that success with this first company, catering lunches to doctors' offices. I am physically going to the restaurant, picking up bags, and this is before Panera, picking up bags of food and taking them, because that's how you got to see physicians at that time, and promoting this rehab services that I had stumbled upon, because pulmonary rehab in Pittsburgh was not a widely reimbursed or widely accessible service. But Western Pennsylvania had sort of like the 3rd highest rate of COPD in the whole country, because just of the demographics of the smoking and the people and the mining and the steel, et cetera. So I thought, there's plenty of patients. They all need this. But this is the fallacy of being a gentleman farmer. What I forgot to do a lot of research on is in regards to the reimbursement. And this is my introduction to healthcare and working with institutions as a insurance. So that was a real eye opener. But I forged ahead. I'd been down that road before in regards to trying to establish. And I'm glad to say that company is still operating. There are 6 locations now here in Western Pennsylvania. I sold that to my general manager after about 5 years, because I decided, I am just not the right guy to be owning a rehab facility. I was too clinical. I was not a clinician. I was more of the scale, get the office space, hire the people. I'm glad it's out there. I'm proud of that because it does have a great service. But that also led me to the sleep business, which here again, I didn't even know about sleep apnea at that time. I was just unaware of that as a condition or a diagnosis. And sort of just like I got into the records business in the pulmonary, I had my medical director said, "Boy, you should turn this into a sleep clinic, my rehab facility." And I go, "What is a sleep clinic? I never heard of that." He says, "Well, that's where people come here and they stay all night and are tested for sleep apnea." And it was one of those things that I realized the ability to utilize a facility, a clinical facility, during the day for the rehab and at night for the sleep patients. I go, this sounds like a great idea.
Brilliant.
So start identifying what it takes. And that really took off. And we went from 1 clinic to about over 20 in about 5 years.
Wow.
And so because sleep apnea at that time was just evolving, and my model was to take it out of the hospital and put it into an outpatient model. Because up to that time, you had to actually be admitted to a hospital to actually get a sleep test. So here again, I didn't invent anything other than moving it. I was the only person who was not a physician or a hospital that owned a sleep clinic. And so I looked at it completely different than they did. We set up our rooms like Marriott hotels with a bottle of water on the side table, and that type of thing. So we were able to scale it very quickly and create alignments and partnerships with hospitals and physician groups because there was a significant backlog of testing to the demand for testing.
And the reimbursement side, you had already figured out at that point.
I was getting smarter. And yes. And so that was a very dramatic scale up here in Western Pennsylvania. So that was my That's
a brilliant way to really leverage the assets that you had, because you created a 24/7 model, right? Pretty much. Weekends maybe, but
oh yeah, weekends were big.
Weekends too. Weekends were big
for the sleep business. Yeah, absolutely. anyways, yeah, so it was a fun ride. So it was funny. I put the businesses together, and then 3 years later, I took them apart again because the sleep business got so big, it was crowding out the rehab, and that's when I sold the rehab away, and so I just focused on the sleep at that time. So,
and what's the name of the sleep business?
It was Lifeline Sleep, and it's still operating today. So, but
did you sell that business too?
Yes, I sold that to my partner at the time. He was the clinical guy. I was the financial sales business strategy guy. Gotcha. And here again, I didn't even know what all those squiggly lines meant. I didn't on the computer and the paper that they were measuring. But you didn't have to if you had the right people working with you. And I sold that to my partner at the end of 2012.
Oh, that's fantastic. Did you take another family break after selling that company?
No, at that time, everybody's in college. They've had enough of traveling with me. And so no. Then it was, I went into the advising business. What else do you do after all that?
Well, that is the exploration. And you said it earlier where, after you sold the first company, you said about 4 years to figure out what your next was. Yeah. And so now at this point, you've worked really hard. You've built these 2 companies, you've sold them, and now you're thinking about your next. What led you to conclude that you wanted to be an advisor? And what are you advising? Because that leads us into present day, right? This is how you getting into, we're going to talk about what you do now with clients. And spoiler alert, you work with clients on exit planning. So it's no surprise. But how did you get to that point to take that leap and say, I want to advise other business owners on exit planning?
Well, when I sold the sleep business, I'd been in this position before. It's like, here again, waking up on Monday morning, what am I going to do now? And I did not have a good answer for that. And you'd think I would be a little bit better prepared, but I wasn't. And I was actually connected to a company that was looking for a transitional president mentor for a key individual within the company. And they asked me if I'd be interested. And I looked at that as my entry into advising, even though I was working for basically the board of directors. And it was the first time I worked for somebody in about 25 years. I thought, you know what? I need to do this. I need to have this kind of transition from being an owner, because I don't want to be an owner of anything anymore. I think I'm done with that. So that's how I felt was my entree into advising, because my role, even though it was very, had a title and it was over 100 employees, et cetera, my role was just to be a babysitter to the business and maintain its, integrity, but really mentor someone. And that's really what got me into advising, because that mentoring really, I loved the mentoring part. I did a great job of that when I started my business and my own businesses, because I'm very much a collaborator. I'm very much a delegator. I like to be out creating the need or identifying the need and providing the resources to fill it. So that's where advising was a great fit for me at that time, because now I have a lot of experience. I've with a lot of different people and a lot of different ages and a lot of different industries. I am not an industry specific. I'm a perfect advisor, master of nothing, dabbled in everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's what led me to advising. And then I went from the mentoring president to a full-time advisor with a very select group of clients, where I was more trying to scale their business and also take young, either generational succession, so that they can scale up within their new responsibility. And also some startup businesses, 2 startup businesses and 2 sort of succession business. So that was my entry into advising. Mm-hmm. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And after 4 years, I'm going like, wow, I had a tendency to be pulled down into the weeds because I became very close to those companies and their executive teams. And, I was in there, I didn't have a lot of clients, so I spent a lot of time with a few clients. After about 4 years of that, I went to one of my mentors and I said, I'm exhausted. This is a lot of work. And he says, Dan, you should check out exit planning. And I go, just like
What's
in the records, what is that?
What is that?
So like my whole career, I get to these what is that moments. And he said, that's when you just work with the business owner and prepare them to exit a already established business. And to me, I felt like I've been studying for that for the last 20 years because I really like working with business owners. I think I obviously have a rapport with them, spent a lot of time with them. I am not industry specific. I've gone a lot of different places. And that's when I started investigating what is exit planning. And here again, Googling it up, and boy, it's a real thing. And that's what led me to where I am now for the last few years, which is 100% of my focus is on exit planning and helping owners. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. I liked how you described exit planning, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about this because of where we are for each other in the ecosystem. My focus is on the value building side, and you talked a lot about that, scaling up, and even I liked how you phrased it, generational succession, scale up, and the innovation side, and really getting the business to where it could get to the point of readiness for exit. And there's two sides of that coin, and you addressed them for yourself. One was the business readiness side, and the other is the owner readiness. Right. And you felt this for yourself, and I'm sure now you see it with clients, that it is not easy to be ready, right? And that Monday morning feeling when after the transaction, we collectively, you and I, we want people to be happy in their next weight, whatever that is. We want them to be happy about it. That doesn't always happen. I kind of wanted to talk about that, and you can share maybe some from your experience, but also if you have client experiences where there isn't necessarily a clear path to letting go. Right. And, how do you think about that? If someone's listening today and they're thinking, I'm an owner, I'm not ready to let go. This is hogwash. I'm 5 years away, 10 years away. Maybe that's sort of one set of way to think about it, right? But if you're maybe closer in, less than 5 years away, and your definition, it's very individual, why you personally would say you're ready, you're not ready. Yeah. And what are those things that you've observed in terms of why someone is more or less ready for transition?
A lot of times it's outside circumstances, and they still personally may feel they're not ready, but they feel like they're, face it, we're all going to exit our business sooner or later. And it becomes a point in time. They get a lot of advisory help, either from family or the advisors around them, that you need to lay the foundation. Let's put it that way. And the problem is, and I think the opportunity is, that there's very little descriptions that owners can latch on to how to do that. Even passing a business on to your executive team and or your family are very, it sounds simple because they know the business, or they've been in the business, or I know you. But that isn't the same as having a successful transition of that business, particularly the more successful the business is, or the more complicated the business is, or the more employees, et cetera, the more people that depend on the business, the more difficult it is to transition. And unless you have a plan and you have vetted that plan with, the successors and the ramifications of the quote unquote clients, or the productivity, quality, all those kinds of things on the business side, there are so many risks that quote unquote pop up. And, every table's got two sides. One is increasing the value to get the highest value for the owner so that they are financially free, we'll say. The other side is the risk side. One's value, the other's risk. How do you diminish or de-risk the business so that when that transition happens, that the eventual owners have the most likelihood of succeeding, not just for 2 years. I mean, their success should last for hopefully decades. So it's not a simple process. And it's not that it hasn't been going on for thousands of years. It has, ever since, the farm to the oldest son type thing. But the amounts of money and information and dependency in today's business world and the speed of change makes these transitions much more critical. And I think that there are tools, be they advisors, be they processes that have been in place for many years, due diligence, et cetera, to help with that. Yeah, you and I are all about the happy exit. 50% of business owners, after they leave their business a year later, are not happy. And that is a startling percentage. And why is that? I mean, they left on their own accord. It's usually not the money. It's usually personal. It's usually they didn't know what to do next. They weren't ready, or they didn't leave the culture the way that, there's all these things. So I think part of the paralysis of planning is the amount of variables that you have to deal with in a owner or a founder leaving and or transitioning, both on the business side and the personal side. Like, where do I start? And it's difficult. I've been there. It was a lot easier for me. The younger you are, the easier it is. The older you are, the harder it is. That's not a surprise.
Well, it's about options. And I think it's also about, being happy in your next, to me, means you're sort of being pulled into something. You're excited to go on that other side versus feeling pushed out of something that feels more negative and could feel more like a loss.
Very good point.
And
yes.
That 50% statistic is pretty shocking, because you would, you think on the surface, oh, so-and-so sold their company, they must feel great about it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always happen that way.
No.
They don't always feel great about it.
Yeah. And they aren't very verbal about it either. That's why it's one of those things that you don't hear about.
Right.
So the ability to have an impact on business owners and make them more ready and more aware and happier and lower that unhappy percentage is, it is available to us. And that's why, what I've been doing the last 2 years, I just feel so rewarded by, because it's not like I work with a lot of people, but the people that I do work with, you can just, they're talking to another business owner. I am not a lawyer. I'm not an investment banker. I'm not a transaction person. I work with them on a monthly basis, meet with them for a few hours here and there. They're busy, but you create that kind of dialogue and that rapport that they really feel like they're getting somewhere that they hadn't been able to address before. They have never talked to someone like me before that is trying to help them with a very personal issue, their business. So, yeah.
No, and you've walked in their shoes and you can understand sort of the emotional side. There's an emotional side to this for sure, as well as the business side.
Yeah.
Winding down here, a couple of last questions for you. As you've talked to owners, certainly over the last year, with the pandemic, in your conversations, what are you hearing about owner readiness? Are you finding that the timing of their readiness has shifted? I've seen some data that is showing that there is a shift, and I'll share what I'm hearing after you share what you're hearing.
Yeah, what we're hearing is that, yes, there's an acceleration. The business values and the 2019 complacency is the wrong word, but those were, we were on 10 years of a great run of business growth. And business owners are human like all of us. As long as everything's going really well, I'm just going to, why leave or why change? The last year has been dramatic, and now everybody is looking at the risks of their business. And that is a big motivator. for business owners to try to start a process to at least control or start identifying the issues that might put their business at risk or their exit at risk. So yeah, it's really accelerated things and a lot more activity.
That's consistent with what I'm hearing too. This is data from the Value Builder company that I work with. And we should mention that you're working with Navix and you're getting a lot of your data from Navix as well as from your conversations one-on-one. Yeah. So the Value Builder survey showed that as well, that essentially the timeline, and it was a significant change in mindset. It was more of a pull in, like they're ready, more ready now-ish, right? Within 5 years, as opposed to, more on the later side, that timing had sort of shifted in. Yeah. And some of that reasoning was because business owners have gone through the 2008, 2009 recession. We've now gone through this and they're really ready. They don't want to go through another, recession again.
A lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns. So yeah, that is definitely consistent. So last question for you is really around, I want to make sure that we cover everything. So let me just ask you a general question. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to share?
As a summary of business owners who are the ones I think who listen to your podcast is it's never too early to start planning a transition. The more you understand about the elements, the better off you'll be, that's planning 101. Your wealth manager will tell you that. Your parents have told you that for years before. And as a parent, you tell your children that. So I guess as an advisor, I think that's the one thing I would put out there to all business owners. Get started on some type of planning. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think the corollary with that is make sure you write it down, because a plan that's in your head is not a plan.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's great. It's a good insight. It's good insight. And so very last question for you, Dan. Yeah. It's been great to talk to you today. Thanks. Do you have a favorite quote that you'd like to share about entrepreneurship?
Well, it was very basic, and it was given to me by a husband of an associate who owned a business also. And he pointed out to me something that I was probably in my 30s at that time. And he said, Dan, every business has a birth, a life, and a death. And I looked at him because I was in an MBA school. I'm a young guy. I dealt with numbers and products and widgets and services, but to humanize that life cycle of a business that way, that is something that's always stuck with me. And so it really made me more of a better business owner, because it is a life cycle of a business. And you don't have to look at it as all the metrics, but as something you have founded, gave birth to. You scale it, or you give it life, and you bring it to whatever type of conclusion. And then the exit or the death, whatever that may be, it doesn't mean it's going out of business. It can be a lot of different transitions, but that is sort of that definition of death. And that's something that I guess that's why I've had so many businesses in my life. I've always seen that as a positive thing and not as a negative thing.
That fits you to a T, a very positive person. Before we go too, if you want to share, how can people find you and connect with you? And then also, because we didn't talk a lot about Navix, just to kind of put a little bit of an underline on who they are and how you're associated with them, and how would people learn more about Navix?
Yeah, you can reach me in my DLS advising website, which mentions the Navix brand significantly. I am an independent consultant for them. They are my back office. They have all my intellectual property, or I use their intellectual property for my processes. And they've been in this for 25 years. They're great. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel with a lot of things with dealing with businesses. That's my association with Navix, and where I am in my career, it's exactly what I want. I want to deal with the business owner. I don't want to deal with all the assessments and the deliverables that we present. They help create those for me. So that's my association with them, and it works great.
Wonderful.
Real happy.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great. All right. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you on air.
Lori.
We talk off air all the time. And I look forward to, getting to know you even more after today, of course, and having the audience learn about you and learn about exit planning. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Lori. It's a pleasure. It really was. Take care.
Innovation, transition, growth. Easy to say, but hard to do. If you're an entrepreneur facing these challenges, I get it. I work with businesses from small to big to achieve your vision. Visit smalldotbig.com to learn more. I'd love to connect with you. Subscribe to Succession Stories, and if you enjoy the show, please share a rating and review. Thanks for listening.